A man was driving a go-kart on a circuit. He was Peter, a famous criminal gangster. After practicing, Peter was visited by his boss, Tsar, asking him to steal a car. Without wasting any time, Peter met his friend, Baka, at the burger joint. Baka was also a gangster, specializing in car theft like Peter. Till now, the two of them have never failed in carrying out their criminal mission. They also invited a skinny guy named Yanni to help them in doing this job. The three of them immediately went to the parking lot, looking for the best car that was worth stealing. When they got there, Yanni found a very expensive car and then told his two friends. Peter would hijack the car, while Baka and Yanni were going to monitor the situation around. Succeeding with the mission, Peter and Baka fled using their stolen car, while Yanni followed them in Peter's car. But unfortunately, the stolen car had a very high level of security, so when it was hijacked, the car would detect it and couldn't be driven normally. In this case, the car could only move backwards, so if they were driving on the main road, they would definitely be ticketed. Because they had no other choice, they were determined to break through all the traffic signs. After driving a car recklessly, they finally arrived at the base camp without being caught by the police. Peter looked furious at Yanni for targeting the car, even though they initially wanted to steal another car. But what could they do? Everything had happened, so, like it or not, they had to sell the car immediately before the owner found out. Another Mafia boss also had an illegal car business, like Tsar. He had just stolen a Mercy and was going to sell it to a big Mafia. He then told his son, Cristo, to immediately take him to his destination. On the other hand, Peter and his girlfriend were fighting because he hasn't sent his girlfriend a message since last night. This also made Peter's girlfriend wondering about what Peter's job actually is, but Peter was still calm and trying to calm down his girlfriend. Peter said that his job was not that important because the most important thing was that Peter would always fulfill his girlfriend's wishes. At the same time, Peter's younger brother, Tony, was scolded by his father because he never studied. However, Tony chose to go to the gym, and seeing this made his father become even more angry, saying that Tony was stubborn like his older brother, Peter. Tony didn't care and still went to the gym. When Tony left, he ran into Peter, and as a good brother, Peter gave some money for his beloved little brother. After that, Peter went into his house. From upstairs, he saw his father carry some goods from his car. However, the father looked helpless. In fact, Peter really wanted to help his father, but his father no longer considered him as his son. Peter chose to go into the house and eat his mother's cooking, because his mother still cared about him and often cooked his favorite food. After eating, he immediately went into his room, looking at a photo of him when he was a kid, who once dreamed of becoming a car racer. But it was a shame because his father never allowed him to achieve that dream. The father even had the heart to hide Peter's toy car so that he would no longer be obsessed with becoming a racer, because he had always wanted all his children to study diligently. Since then, Peter began to hate his father and chose to become a gangster. Meanwhile, a Mafia named Golub had just finished his breakfast. People knew him as a very cruel boss. He did not hesitate to kill people who harmed his business. In his place, he was waiting for a car from the Mafia boss, but it never came because it turned out that Cristo still hadn't delivered the car. What's worse, he actually used the car to hang out with a woman. Meanwhile, Peter met Tsar, and at this place, the gangsters were dismantling the stolen car so they could sell the auto parts separately. Tsar told his men that he would soon have a grandchild, therefore he wanted to celebrate this good news with Peter, his best subordinate. After that, Peter and Yanni were ordered to sell the auto parts to someone. After carrying out his duties, Peter intended to buy something at the nearest shop, but his gaze was diverted to the luxury Mercy car belonging to Golub. Cristo was careless. He's too busy with his woman, so Peter intended to steal the car. Peter thought this was a golden opportunity, so he immediately took action. Peter called Tsar and said that he had just succeeded in stealing a luxury car, and he planned to give the proceeds from the sale of this car as a gift for the birth of Tsar's grandchild. However, when Peter told him the characteristics of the car, Tsar suddenly became worried, telling Peter to return the car because Tsar already knew that the car belonged to Golub. However, Peter didn't want to lose, so he chose to store the car in a hidden place. Because of the theft, Golub was very angry and immediately tortured Christo. Golub was wondering about the car delivery, which took a very long time. Moreover, the car has disappeared even though there was an important item in it. Because Christo couldn't take responsibility for his duty, Golub decided to teach him a lesson. After finishing Christo off, Golub contacted a police commander, Stupar, who had been working with the Mafia all this time. Golub ordered him to arrest the car thief as soon as possible. Hearing the order, Stupar met Yanni, who was known as the best informant in the city. Stupar forced Yanni to tell the information about someone who had dared to steal Golub's car. However, Yanni didn't want to reveal and endanger Peter. Of course, Stupar wasn't satisfied with the answer, so he finally forced Yanni out. Yanni gave up after being beaten badly, and he was forced to tell them that Peter was the culprit. The next day, Stupar asked his men to raid Peter's house, but they didn't know that Peter could run very fast. Because the police failed to catch Peter, Golub then intended to mobilize his men. But after hearing this, Stupar did not agree. He instead offered another way so that there was no unnecessary commotion. Stupar suggested making Peter a national fugitive and spreading his information to the media. Not long after, all media broadcasted the case. But strangely, in all the news, Peter was slandered as Christo's murderer. Tsar started to panic and worry about Peter's condition because, as a senior gangster, he knew that Golub would do anything to bring down people who opposed him. At the same time, Peter met Baka to ask for his help, but after finding out that his best friend had become a fugitive, Baka immediately became angry. At first, Baka didn't want to get involved in this problem because he just got out of prison last month. But for the sake of his friend, he finally wanted to help Peter. Meanwhile, Tsar met Golub at a restaurant. Golub wanted to ask for Tsar's responsibility because Peter had caused problems with him. Turns out the two of them were old friends, but their fates were different because Tsar had no ambition to become a ruler. Due to this problem, Golub asked Tsar to hand Peter over alive, otherwise all the people closest to Peter would be killed. Like it or not, Tsar was forced to obey Golub's wishes in order to protect his family. He immediately went to Peter's hiding place, but Peter had already left with Baka. Tsar contacted Peter, but Peter didn't care at all. Peter and Baka were near Yanni's house to beat him, because he had a big mouth and revealed Peter's information. They were sure that Yanni was the person who told the police that Peter was the car thief. Yanni didn't want to admit it, so Peter was forced to use violence. Unfortunately, Yanni was too afraid to tell Peter about the police who met him, so Peter decided to leave instead of wasting time with him. Peter and Baka also visited Tony, who was practicing boxing. Peter asked his brother to take Golub's car so he could trick the police. However, Golub's men had been watching them all along. Peter realized it, then finally got into the car, inviting Golub's men for reckless racing. Luckily, Peter had driving skills like Dominic Toretto, so he managed to escape. Afterwards, Peter told his brother to go home because now the situation was very dangerous. But Tony didn't want to obey. He wanted to stay with his brother. If he went home, he would definitely be scolded by his father. But Peter kept forcing him, so Tony was finally forced to go home. After Tony went home, Peter and Baka checked Golub's mercy car, just in case there was something important in it. Sure enough, there were lots of drugs in the trunk. At this moment, they finally understood why Golub had deployed the police just to catch a car thief. On the other hand, Golub was at a restaurant to meet the Mafia boss, Christo's father. The Mafia boss asked about the person who killed his son, and of course, Golub pretended not to know so that he wouldn't be blamed. If he was caught murdering, the Mafia boss would definitely take revenge and ruin his business. Golub and Stupar then convinced him that they would soon find Peter, who they slandered as Christo's murderer. On the other hand, Peter and Baka met their boss. Tsar said that he had to return Golub's car and also handed over Peter. Peter didn't want to lose, let alone be sacrificed. He was actually planning to ask Golub for ransom money if he wanted to take the car and the drugs in it. Hearing Peter's plan, Tsar looked to give up and didn't know what else to do. He could only warn his two men to be careful. Tsar then visited Stupar and Golub without Peter. As a form of his responsibility, Tsar was willing to be killed by Golub as long as they didn't bother his family. But when Golub was about to shoot Tsar, Peter suddenly called, making a pretty fair offer. So Golub had to give Peter ransom money and let go of his girlfriend. In return, Peter would return the car. Initially, Golub wasn't satisfied with the offer, but on the other hand, he also had no other choice because if he didn't agree, Peter would definitely sell his car. So, like it or not, Golub accepted the offer and gave up his intention to kill Tsar. When Golub was about to meet Peter, Stupor suddenly stopped him. It turned out that Stupor already knew that Golub was the person who killed Christo. Stupor asked Golub to admit his mistake to the Mafia boss and then apologized. Otherwise, the Mafia boss would definitely break their cooperative relationship, especially since he was an important person who has an international Mafia network. But Golub didn't seem to care about the risk, so Stupor secretly approached Tsar and invited him to trap Golub. Without thinking twice, Tsar immediately accepted Stupor's invitation. The next day, Peter and Bacca came to the meeting place with Golub, but this cruel Mafia didn't come. Instead, he sent his men, and worse, Golub didn't want to give a penny to Peter. As a result, there was no agreement between the two parties, and the situation became tense. Finally, a shootout broke out. Because they were outnumbered, Peter and Bacca chose to run away, but unfortunately, Bacca was shot in the stomach. Seeing this, Peter immediately took him to the hospital. At the same time, Peter's girlfriend was being held hostage by Stupor. Here, Stupor was still pretending to help Golub before carrying out his plan with Tsar. With the other gangsters, Stupor interrogated Peter's girlfriend and asked her about Peter's whereabouts. But instead of answering, Peter's girlfriend just talked nonsense and admitted that she was pregnant. After that, Stupor met Yanni, forcing him to tell Peter's hiding place. He planned to wait until Peter returned to that place. On the other hand, Golub's men raided Peter's house and even hurt his parents and his younger brother. Golub's men warned Peter's father to persuade his son to surrender. If he failed, the gangsters would come back to slaughter his family. Peter returned to his hiding place, but he was shocked to find Yanni lying lifeless. Apparently, Stupor and the gang had murdered Yanni. Peter immediately checked the entire building, looking for the perpetrator. But he didn't find anyone except the guard of that place. Because he felt bothered, the guard immediately sent Peter away. On the way, Peter received news from his mother that Golub's men had just threatened their family. Hearing his mother's frightened voice, Peter felt very sorry for all his actions. If only he hadn't stolen Golub's car, something like this wouldn't have happened. When Peter was heading home, he got a call from Stupor, telling him that his girlfriend was pregnant. Peter was shocked to hear the news. He felt happy because he would soon become a father, but on the other hand, he didn't want his child to be born in a chaotic condition. Stupor then threatened Peter, said that he would send Peter's girlfriend to prison if Peter didn't hand over Golub's car. So, without wasting any time, Peter decided to surrender himself for the good sake of his girlfriend and future child. At the same time, Stupor met the Mafia boss and informed that Golub was the person who killed Christo. He also showed all the evidence he had. And after seeing all the evidence, the Mafia boss ordered Stupor to kill Golub in the most cruel way. He wanted Golub to feel the same suffering as his late son. Stupor was about to look for Golub, but he was surprised because Peter suddenly pointed a gun at him. Peter forced this corrupt policeman to go to a remote and deserted place. Here, Peter threatened to kill Stupor if he didn't let go of his girlfriend. In the end, Stupor ordered his men to let go of Peter's girlfriend, but Stupor also offered Peter to cooperate in killing Golub. Peter was also willing to cooperate, as long as Stupor didn't bother the people close to Peter. Hearing that, Stupor immediately agreed. He would even lighten Peter's sentence if he was later caught by other police. On the other hand, Tony was taking his older brother's gun, then gave it to Peter, who had just arrived home. Their father finally found out about this meeting, and he begged Peter not to involve Tony in danger. Finally, Peter obeyed his father and told Tony to come back home. Meanwhile, Golub was at a business meeting. Not long after, he received news that Stupor had succeeded in arresting Peter. He didn't know that this news was just a trap. At night, Golub and his men seemed to have gone somewhere to make sure that Peter had really been arrested. He finally saw that Peter was languishing in a room with his hands cuffed. Of course, Golub felt that he had won and then forced Peter to show him the location of his car. When Golub arrived at the location, he looked very happy because he was able to take all the narcotics in the car. But suddenly, unexpected things happened. Finally, Peter managed to finish off Golub, who had dared to disturb his family. The next day, Peter came to see Tsar, who was holding his grandchild. Peter apologized for all the chaos caused by him. But as a wise person, Tsar forgave Peter, especially since Peter was the best subordinate and considered like his own son. But from now on, Tsar decided to retire from the criminal world so that his family would not be in danger. Initially, he wanted to hand over his position to Peter, but it seemed like Peter was also fed up with his job. Returning from his boss's house, Peter went to the police station to surrender. Because Peter had come willingly, Stupor finally freed Peter's girlfriend. Before saying goodbye, Peter and his girlfriend were hugging to let go of their longing. Unfortunately, they had to be in a long-distance relationship after this, because Peter would be detained for 3 years in prison.